So we are on point 2, and point 2 is about cultivating the so-called two bodhicittas, two types of enlightened or awakened attitude, or two types of awakening mind. And in the previous meetings, we have been primarily focused on the ultimate awakening mind, that is the ultimate bodhicitta, that is essentially wisdom with regards to the ultimate nature of reality. And last class was in a way particularly challenging because we took a very brief look into different reasonings that are used to establish the fact that all phenomena are devoid of independent existence. This is a bit brainy for some people, and it does involve the active use of our intelligence and our discerning ability. And as a result of that, it might, for some people, feel too much on the philosophy side. Although in practice, it is a practical way of meditating. But some people are super passionate about that, and then they might get super excited about this part, the part that is about analyzing reality, but then somewhat more discouraged or less enthusiastic when we reach the other half, cultivating the bodhicitta that stems from compassion, love, and so forth, and that's where we're going to go tonight. But before that, we will do a practice after we have generated the preliminary motivation and so forth, as we usually do. We will do another practice related to ultimate nature of reality, and this comes straight from the great master Padmasambhava, and this is another approach to understanding the nature of our awareness. So just as a reminder to revisit these points, we have discussed the preliminary secret line that says, once stability has been established, reveal the mystery. And then we talked about the following lines of ponder that phenomena are like a dream, discern the basic nature of awareness that has no arising, the opponent itself liberates itself in its own place, the essential nature of the path is to settle within a state of the all-encompassing basis. And we've spent the most time on the first line, ponder that phenomena are like a dream. That one is the most easy to understand, even though not easy to integrate. So the meditation that we're going to do, stemming from Padmasambhava's tradition, and he teaches that as a concentration practice, but it includes an element of discernment or inquiry or insight. And then he also very clearly says, yes, if you do that, you might break through to the ultimate nature of your awareness as well. So it kind of 3 in 1. So this specific practice will concern the lines starting with discern the basic nature of awareness, then the opponent itself, and then the essential nature of the path. All 3 of these are covered in this one meditation, but we can do it in a lot of different ways, and we could do it for a very long time, and then we will achieve those different results. So let's play with it as an initial exercise, just to see how it feels, and then I'll add some notes on it, and then in the future you'll have the choice to do the more analytical one and this more immediate one that we're going to do. But first, finding a comfortable stationary position and spending a few moments adjusting the different elements of our body, the different parts of our body. For many of us, this means elongating the spine gently, relaxing the shoulders, making sure the positioning of our legs and of our hands is most comfortable for what we're about to do for meditation. Then choosing whether for this initial period of relaxation to keep our eyes closed or open, even though later on it will be recommended to keep them at least partially open so that some light might come in. But we can open them later if we want. And then with that, bringing our awareness all the way down to the ground. Touching the earth with our attention by noticing the sensations of being in contact with the surface beneath us. Noticing that firmness, that stability, and inviting our own relaxation response, first in our feet and toes, in the backside of our legs, throughout our legs. Then in our pelvic floor, around our hips, in the abdominal area, and then throughout the torso. In the upper arms, forearms, hands and fingers, bringing our fingers to complete stillness. Then coming back to the shoulders, exploring the sensations in our neck and throat. And finally softening the muscles of the face. Making sure our breath is flowing naturally without any attempts to hold it, control it, force it. And with the breath moving naturally, using our mind to also establish a truly vast and positive motivation for this entire exploration and for this specific practice as well. And if we wish, we can go straight to establishing the relative or conventional bodhicitta, generating or reactivating, strengthening the wish to become fully awakened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Reminding ourselves that that's the highest goal here, to fully uncover our amazing Buddha potential for the benefit of all who live, and to realize that goal through accessing more and more and more profound types of wisdom and compassion, wisdom and love. And with that as our motivation in the back of our mind, embarking upon an exploration related to awareness, which also doubles as a concentration practice. One of the multiple ways of doing the so-called concentration without a reference point, or shamatha without an object as it's sometimes translated. And to do that, ideally, we can at least partially open our eyes to just create that sense of spaciousness, where our awareness is not locked into the dark space behind the eyelids. can also just a tiny bit open our mouth to allow for some of the breath to flow through our mouth in addition to our nose, dividing our breath between the two. And then for the main part of the practice, placing our awareness in the space in front of us, not on any specific physical object, but simply on that experience of vastness. And resting with that vastness by allowing our awareness to merge with it. Vastness itself is simply defined as absence of obstacles. That's the definition of space in general. And we're simply resting in this lack of boundaries by releasing everything that is not that. But because simply resting with vastness might feel a bit confusing initially, and our mind might quickly succumb to its habits of distraction, thought creation, rumination, and so forth, Padmasambhava offers a helpful tool which we can use temporarily to strengthen the force of our samadhi. And that tool is to sometimes pull back to this bareness, to the bare awareness itself. And sometimes to release. Sometimes zoning in on the bare awareness with its starkness and clarity, and sometimes releasing everything, including all the unnecessary arising thoughts, images, memories, and so forth. This oscillation between greater focus and greater release can be done independently of the breath, just in longer, comfortable periods, or conjoined with the breath. And in that case, we use the in-breath to zone in on the starkness of awareness itself, and we use the out-breath, the exhalation, to release everything. And so for a little while we're doing this gentle oscillation between focusing on clarity itself and releasing everything. And then releasing the process of oscillation to simply rest in spacious clarity. Then doing some more oscillation, zoning in, releasing, and if we wish, combining the two with the process of natural breathing. And just this alternation of period of simply resting and period of doing the oscillation could be practiced for hundreds and thousands of hours with incredibly good results. But to help us a little bit with the inquiry or insight part, Padmasambhava here makes another suggestion. He invites us to, on occasion, explore the question of who is the agent doing the oscillation. Who makes the decision to zone in and to release? And so with this question in mind, we're not doing analysis, we're not following a sequence of arguments, as we would in some systems of practice, but rather we're looking directly. And on top of that, even that can be combined with the oscillation itself. So with the in-breath, for example, we'll look more closely. Who's the agent doing this? With the out-breath, we release. Or we do these periods even without conjoining them with the breath. Taking some time to look closely, taking some time to release and rest. Who is the agent? Releasing all of that to simply rest. And then doing the same thing but with another question. What is this awareness that is experiencing all of this? And once again, not following a sequence of arguments, but looking directly. What is it? And if we wish, combining it with the oscillation. Looking more closely with the in-breath, releasing with the out-breath. And then once again, simply releasing. Releasing the question, releasing the oscillation. And as we approach the conclusion of this practice, finding the appearances of the body to ground ourselves there. Mentally dedicating the energy of this practice to our highest aspirations once again, including our full awakening. And then slowly reactivating the body as we conclude the practice very gently. Thank you. As a side technical note, we haven't had any questions online, so if you have any at any point, feel free to post them in the chat. I do want to make sure everyone knows there is that possibility to ask clarifying questions at any point, and not only if you're here physically. But just some notes on this specific practice. So it comes from the teachings of Padmasambhava, even though it's not unique to them, because there are some lineages of Mahamudra who also do this practice of oscillation, as I called it, or alternating a period of focusing more intently with a period of releasing everything. Actually, in this specific approach, and we could spend hours discussing that, this technique of focusing, releasing is the strategy that is used to counteract the two main obstacles that we're facing in concentration practice, the obstacles of excitation or agitation, which includes mental distractions, which includes any sort of excess of energy within our mental system. And the other main obstacle, which is laxity, sometimes also translated as sinking, which is when we lack the necessary amount of clarity of energy while focusing on an object. So in most other approaches, including, for example, mindfulness of breathing as a technique, we counteract those by applying mindfulness and introspection to mental functions that allow us to hold the object with mental glue, that's mindfulness, and monitor whether we have become distracted, that's introspection. So through combining mindfulness and introspection, through strengthening both, we're gradually removing first gross excitation and laxity, then subtle excitation, laxity, and then we progress through 9 stages of attentional training, or 4 stages or 5 stages. There are different systems of describing that. And when we reach the breakthrough of the so-called axis concentration, which is shamatha, we talked about this concept a lot, we have perfected our mindfulness and our introspection, both those mental functions within us, those functions of our psyche, those mental factors, as they're called in Buddhism, have been developed to a relatively perfect level, and they will continue serving us for the rest of this lifetime, which is why we need this whole thing. We need to perfect them to use them successfully for insight meditations. Here the approach is completely different. Instead of bothering ourselves or spending too much time on mindfulness and introspection and trying to perfect those, through oscillation we release and we gather. So with gathering we strengthen clarity, which is the opposite of laxity. With release, we release the excessive energy, therefore excitation. And so it's a constant process of balancing, which in this approach is extremely ingenious. This shows how unimaginable Padmasambhava is as a meditation instructor. He teaches hundreds and thousands of techniques, but when he teaches each one of them, he really gives you incredible teachings on each one. And this specific practice comes through the lineage of Padmasambhava's teachings, which were revealed or rediscovered by a great master by the name of Karmalingpa, and then transmitted through multiple generations. So this practice has actually direct connection to the very famous Bardo Chudrol, which most people know as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I guess, which is not its actual name. It's the actual name. Actually, it's a system of different texts, and one of them in particular is about being liberated through receiving these instructions or hearing these instructions while you are in the state of Bardo, right after your physical breath has stopped, and you've passed through the stage of clear light, and you're seeing these visions and so forth, which are described in the book. That specific text, and there are many similar ones, is part of a much larger complex of teaching systems practices revealed by Karmalingpa. And in some of them, Guru Padmasambhava gives very, very clear instructions on how to practice with each of the 6 intermediate stages of bardos in which we find ourselves. Not just the 3 that relate to dying and rebirth, but also the 3 in which we are alive. And those are the bardo, or the intermediate state of being alive, the waking state, the intermediate state of meditation, and the intermediate state of sleeping and dreaming. So in each one of those we can do some practices. He introduces them very clearly, and specifically for our waking state, because we have not yet entered deep types of meditation, at least as beginners for sure. For that, he introduces us to these practice of developing concentration and developing insight. But this specific technique combines the two. It's mostly concentration, focusing on that atom of awareness, that bare, stark nature of clarity and spaciousness, or cognizance and luminosity. But because there's also that element of inquiry, who's the agent? And then what's this awareness? It can slowly help us break through multiple levels of reification. We talked about that concept last time in detail, how reification is the opposite of insight and the main obstacle to insight. And as we do that, it will not simply help us break through the more obvious types of reification, which we anyway remove through the foundational insight practices related to our body, to our feelings, to our mind, and so forth, the so-called 4 applications of mindfulness, which is Buddha's primary teaching on foundational type insight practice, we could say, a foundational type vipassana or vipassana. Many levels of reification we would already remove through doing those more simple practices. So, for example, attending to the impermanence of the body, attending to the dissatisfactory nature of the body, attending to the fact that the body is not our self. It is somehow connected to the self, but is not the self per se. We would remove many types of reification there, but this specific practice can lead us to an even deeper level than those. It can lead us to a breakthrough into our pristine awareness, our rikpa, or the ultimate level or ultimate dimension of our awareness. So this is something that is said by Padmasambhava himself in the descriptions of this practice, and that's why when qualified masters deliver this presentation or give this instruction or guide this meditation, they sometimes use it as a pointing out instruction on its own, an instruction that would help us recognize the ultimate nature of our mind. However, for that to happen, for any of this to happen, for us to cultivate profound concentration, for us to break through relatively simple types of reification, for us to break through deep reification, and eventually grasp the nature, understand the nature of our ultimate awareness, we would need two strong networks or two accumulations that we spent so much time discussing last time. Remember the network of positive potential or merit, the network of deep insight. We strengthen those two interconnected psychological systems within ourselves through doing different types of practices. Yeah? Yeah, that's a good question. Could we say that even the bringing in will help us strengthen the accumulation of merit, and the release would help us strengthen the accumulation of wisdom? We could think about different levels of correspondence there. From my side, I would say that the most obvious one is that both the release and the bringing in help us primarily with the accumulation of wisdom, and the more contrived or the more effortful practices of loving kindness, compassion, and so forth that we also will do today help us with the accumulation of method. And only later on the path, when we see the inseparability of method and wisdom, because we see that love, compassion, and so forth as simply the effulgence or the glow of wisdom, they're simply emotional expressions of wisdom, as we would put, then any practice that we do, either this one related to recognizing the nature of awareness or the practice of love and compassion and so forth, they would be strengthening both networks at that point. For me, as a beginner, as a complete beginner, I would say, oh yeah, this is more about recognizing the true nature of awareness. And indirectly does contribute to me also seeing that, oh, if that's the nature of my awareness, should probably be the same for all of us. So therefore, method side is strengthened that way. But that connection is a bit indirect, and therefore there's a lot of value in doing those types of practices separately first, which is, at least in the tradition that I've been trained, this is the instruction or the recommendation. So quite often, actually, before doing this specific meditation, we would first strengthen the network of positive potential by doing mental offerings, by inviting lineage teachers, actually by first inviting lineage teachers, then doing mental offerings to them, taking refuge in them, offering them our body, speech, and mind, and transformed universe as a pure mandala, and yada, 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 doing all these sorts of things, reciting some mantras, doing visualizations to imagine the purification of our system. All of that to strengthen the accumulation of merit and to add greater plasticity to our awareness, make it more flexible, because we would need that flexibility to understand what is it that I'm doing with the inhale and the exhale, with the zoning in and with the release. And even with that, ideally, we would first do just the bare oscillation of trying to focus on awareness itself for some days, weeks, months, years, depending on how much we're practicing. Then we would do the stage in which we're exploring who is the agent. Then we would spend some days, weeks, months on what is the awareness. And then there's a fourth stage, which is more about breaking through the barriers within our perception of awareness. So in that one, we didn't do it this time because it is less pertinent at the moment. But in that one, Padmasambhava suggests that we put our awareness sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left, sometimes up in the sky, sometimes below. So we focus in those points, and that helps us actually understand that our awareness is not at all locked in the skull or anywhere in the body or anywhere at all in physical location. What is actually true, and that is the experience of yogis who do these types of practices related to the mind and its nature, is the opposite, something that we have established already in the first point of ponder that phenomena are like a dream. And this is where we can reestablish it, but from the back door. What would happen if we do a lot of this practice, or if we do this practice for hundreds and thousands of hours, is that we will realize it's not that the mind is in the brain, which is in the skull, which is in this body. It's that the appearances of this body and the skull and all the walls and the entirety of matter are simply a holographic projection within awareness. So complete flip of the scientific materialist perception of reality, established through our own personal experience of investigating this directly. Instead of seeing consciousness as simply a byproduct of chemical activity in the brain, yada, 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 we suddenly see that, oh no, it's the opposite. Matter is a projection within the domain of awareness. And awareness in its bare, stark form is not limited to simply the gross consciousness that we have right now. And even is not simply limited to the so-called substrate consciousness, which we have talked about it as well, alaya. And I'll just revisit it briefly now. But it's actually boundless, especially when we reach that level of ultimate awareness. So this is stuff that is pretty deep, and I dare not say more. We can start practicing at this level and over time receive more instructions on this specific method, on other methods related to the ultimate and conventional natures of our awareness. This is what's emphasized in the traditions of Great Seal or Mahamudra, Great Perfection or Dzogchen, and these are, according to many lineage holders, these are the ultimate practices in the Tibetan Buddhist repertoire, most direct, most immediate, most efficient. But they require all the other parts of this text in particular and of many other teachings for us to succeed in them. So this is where we can gently move on, having planted these initial seeds. But before that, just to offer a tiny bit of explanation for the points themselves. So in this specific method, this last point of ponder that phenomena are like a dream is not something we investigate directly, right? Even though that fourth stage that I just mentioned, in which we place our awareness to the left and to the sky and so forth, can indirectly lead to that experience of all these phenomena being merely projections within the domain of awareness. So indirectly, we're also tackling that. Directly, to work with it directly, we can do exactly what Longchenpa suggested when we were quoting from him, and that is to first do preliminary stages, prepare ourselves for meditation, and then actually meditate on this thought of how everything within the current holographic bubble of our personal appearances arises in the same way that dreams do. The laws are slightly different in that we cannot pass through walls here, unlike in a dream, and we cannot jump from windows. But the holographic nature of the cognizable objects is very similar. We can explore that through different reasonings or just meditate on that directly, resting in that feeling. That's Longchenpa's suggestion. But then this practice from Guru Rinpoche was specifically tackling the next few lines. Discern the basic nature of awareness that has no arising. So when we were focusing on simply coming closer to awareness and then releasing, so this inbound movement and then release, that is already bringing us closer to first the conventional nature of our awareness, the cognizant luminosity, the luminosity in cognizance. And the more we do it, the more we taste that directly. This is why this practice is a little bit tricky, even though it is called shamatha without a reference point, a shamatha without an object. As you can see, it's not at all about simply allowing our mind to wander all over the place and sometimes think of an elephant, sometimes think of our right foot, sometimes listen to the beautiful sounds around and then dream of our lunch tomorrow. It's not that understanding of without a reference point or without an object. It's that any object other than the starkness of our awareness loses its meaning for us temporarily. So we zone in on that and then we release. And when we release, also obviously no particular object of the mind is of interest to us. But the nature itself is irreducible. We cannot lose it. So it's still there at all times. So that brings us actually into familiarity with the conventional nature of awareness, and then to understand how even that is not inherently existent, is not inherently established, we do those additional steps of what's the agent. So what's the agent has to do more with the coarse level of our mind, where we make these decisions, our waking consciousness. But then when we have broken through that reification to a little to a certain degree, we then ask the next question, which is, what is this awareness? So that's what we did in meditation, and that is taking us even through the more subtle types of grasping. We have kind of seen maybe experientially that agent is not independently existent and is not findable. And we have seen that not through argumentation, which is a valid approach for sure, but simply through looking and looking and looking at looking. It's almost a Zen or Chan approach in that regard. There's very, very close similarity between this and the Huatou practice in the Chinese tradition, and the Korean tradition as well. So we focused on that, broken through that, then what's this awareness? Looking, 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 releasing, looking, releasing, looking, releasing, looking, releasing. Releasing allows us to not settle, not grasp to any answer that comes up. Because if an answer comes up, we just need to look deeper. So what's the agent? This is one thing that might happen. So let's say you have been habituated to a certain degree to some forms of Hindu philosophy that describe Atman. Atman that is eternally blissful, Satchitananda, right? There's nothing wrong with that per se, if it were experiential. But here we're talking about a conceptual answer. Because, well, there's very different opinions. Oh, is it good if some Buddhists see similarity between their practice and Hindu practice? Is it bad? Is it crossing a line? What did the great 84 Mahasiddhas of ancient India actually think? Were they all anti-Atman? Did some of them support the idea of Atman? It's a big mystery. We don't know for sure. Different answers are given by different teachers. And we have teachers who would say, oh no, if you fall into Hindu thinking, that's not going to end up well. You're going to end up reifying reality. And some teachers that are more flexible in their understanding of that, and Padmasambhava himself in his very famous text, The Garland of Views, says that Atman is one name for this thing that we're trying to establish here. But be all of that as it may, here we're concerned with practical experience, not concepts, right? So when your mind presents you with the answer, oh, maybe the decision maker is Atman, and it's Satchitananda. Okay, I'm so clever. When that comes up, nope, just look closer. Who is the agent? And then your mind might say something else. I don't know, Santa Claus. Nope, look deeper. Maybe it's God. Nope, look deeper. Maybe it's Jesus. Nope, look deeper. Maybe it's just bare awareness itself. Still look deeper. So whatever your mind turns up, still looking deeper, because we're trying to cross the threshold we're trying to go beyond just simply conceptual answers. But to not overdo it in terms of exertion, we also have periods of release, because otherwise we would push ourselves too far, and we would be accidentally, for example, bringing some imbalance to our subtle energy winds through that, because we're so passionate and we're so focused and we're also holding our breath and waiting for the answer to pop up at any point, at any moment. That's not good. That's the ingenuity of Padmasambhava. He protects us from this overexertion in us releasing. Yes, we do look. Ooh, is it there? What's the agent? And then we have to release. That's the instruction. We have to look again. And then, yes, we have to release into, that's the question here in the chat, into groundlessness, yeah, in a way. But groundlessness itself should also not be a hashtag within our mind that we're focused on. Oh, maybe it's groundlessness. Nope. Even beyond that. Looking, and then simply dropping, simply releasing. Then the same with the next question of awareness. And then eventually, there will be periods when we simply release. We simply rest. So instead of zoning in and releasing, we simply rest. It's kind of a flat line. And that flat line is expressed in the essential nature of the path is to settle within a state of the all-encompassing basis. So this all-encompassing basis in Tibetan is kunshi. In Sanskrit, it's alaya. And there are different meanings to this word. So in the general Buddhist or specifically Mahayana presentation of the different layers of the mind, we have the coarse waking mind, which is what we're in right now. We're operating with that. I'm Lobsang. I have two hands. I am a human being, and so forth. That's where our coarse awareness is right now. And that's the one that's reliant from a Buddhist point of view on the brain. Destroy my brain, that coarse type of consciousness will never come back. I will be reborn, in another form and with another coarse consciousness, but this specific coarse consciousness will not come back once you have damaged or destroyed my brain. So there's a correlate relationship there. The energy of awareness is configured in conjunction with the brain. But even when we do destroy the brain or the brain dies, we still have two more layers of awareness or types of consciousness that are available to us. And the second one is what is typically called alaya consciousness, alaya vijnana or vijnana. And so kunshi namshi, and kunshi namshe in Tibetan. And as Always translates that as substrate consciousness, which is a very nice translation that I really like. So it's a substrate for the coarse level of the mind. The coarse level of the mind arises or crystallizes out of that substrate. But that substrate, were we to enter it through concentration practices, were we to melt our coarse mind temporarily through concentrating very deeply back into that substrate mind, it would have three primary qualities that we would experience. We would experience perfect clarity, perfect non-conceptuality, well, imperfect, but perfect in that no conceptual thought pops up. Imperfect because there's still grasping a duality there. It does not have been fully removed. And then bliss. So the type of bliss that can even be experienced as little glimpses before that is just a reflection of that deeper bliss of substrate consciousness. And then once you enter it, that's why people get stuck in samadhi for thousands of years sometimes, because it's so blissful, which from a Buddhist point of view is a trap. Don't go there, as in, don't go there, but don't get stuck there. And there's lots of warnings about not getting attached to this type of bliss, because it's, once again, nothing compared to the actual bliss of full liberation and full awakening. But it is incredibly blissful, and also, that's not often emphasized, but it is mentioned in the teachings, there is a natural quality of care or non-indifference there, which becomes important when we talk about compassion and love. So that's the substrate consciousness, and yet it is still individual, in that it is not same for all of us. It is similar for all of us, but you have your stream, your flow of substrate consciousness. I have my stream of substrate consciousness. And so we don't become indivisible at that level, even though we both, were we to enter it, would feel perfect non-conceptuality, perfect bliss, and perfect clarity. But the type of alaya, or all-encompassing basis, that is taught here, that is mentioned here, is not that relative or samsaric substrate consciousness. The Kagyu tradition in Tibetan Buddhism divides this all-encompassing basis into Kunshi Namshe and Kunshi Yeshe. So Kunshi Namshe is substrate consciousness. Kunshi Yeshe is underlying, or substrate, we could say, we could translate it the same way, primordial wisdom. So one is simply consciousness, meaning it's the same, one of the multiple types of consciousness of a samsaric being. The other one is beyond all of that. It's primordial wisdom, yeshe, or jnana, or jnana. So the one that's mentioned here is that primordial wisdom. It's not simply this deeper, but still completely samsaric level of mind. Here, because it's about emptiness and cognizing emptiness, it's about nature of the mind and cognizing nature of the mind. What's meant here is that a primordial wisdom. And the instruction is to rest in our best approximation of that. So whenever we make all this effort to recognize and to release, whenever we attend Dzogchen or Mahamudra teachings with a truly qualified master and they do pointing out for us, and we try to understand what is it that they're pointing at, and we get a certain glimpse here and there. We are seeing glimpses of this primordial wisdom, but sometimes an analogy is given with seeing, I'm looking if we can see the moon here, but I can't, at least from my vantage point. It is like seeing the moon, but through multiple levels of clouds, and also not particularly clearly because the city is full of lights, you know, all this stuff, all this noise is blocking the moon, but we can still see the shiny shape somewhere there. So that's how we initially perceive our pristine awareness, we perceive our own primordial wisdom when we're attempting to get there, and when we're practicing initially. It might take us ages to see it in the perfectly clear sky where all the clouds have been removed and the pointing out has been done completely. So that's why, you know, we in this tradition also hear that you might go to hundreds of lamas initially and ask for these pointing out instructions. Please show me the ultimate nature of my own mind, which has its own etiquette about it, by the way. So it's not to be taken lightly, those sorts of things. Chogyam Rinpoche sometimes jokes about how, well, no jokes, but he points out a real thing that happens. But it's about how sometimes kind of globalized people, and I'm sure most of those are Westerners, come to him and they say, well, you know, Rinpoche, I have a flight tonight. Could you briefly introduce me to the nature of my mind? And Rinpoche has to say, no. What are you talking about? You have no preparation whatsoever. You literally just went to a coffee place somewhere around Bodhistupa, someone told you, oh, there's this nature of mind introduction that you should really ask, and you have no context whatsoever, but you're coming and asking for it as if it was me handing you out candy, you know. And although an exceptional student could receive such a thing, I think what Rinpoche is implying by telling those stories is that most people who ask are not exceptional students. They're people who need all the preparation that we've been discussing. And then through that, they will get that initial glimpse. And then through prolonged practice of this nature, releasing, zoning in, and doing other types of Dzogchen Mahamudra meditations, the recognition will become more and more and more and more clear. And the ability to simply rest in that all-ground nature will be growing. And eventually, for a fully perfect practitioner, that's all they do. And that encompasses everything. That's why it's called all-encompassing in this regard. And then from that point of view, it is absolutely true that a practitioner who can simply rest in the true nature of their mind, or mostly do that, even though there would be occasional moments of distraction for them. For such a practitioner, there is no need to do any effortful method practices, or any effortful wisdom practices for that matter, because through simply resting in it, they are accumulating infinite amounts of positive potential and infinite amounts of wisdom. So sometimes you are attending, that's another explanation that's sometimes given. Let's say you would travel to Nepal or Bhutan or Tibet proper or northern India, and you would go into a monastery, or you would visit actually one of the monasteries here in the West. So you would go to Samyeling here in Scotland, or any other glorious place. There are many wonderful monasteries re-established in the West. You would go there and you would attend a so-called puja, or ritual offering practice, in which the monastics would be chanting, and there would be some music being played with arcane instruments. He would be like, where are the violins? You know, what is this long horn that they're playing with such horrible sounds and so forth, large cymbals and all of that. So you would be witnessing all of that, and if you have some openness, you would be thinking, okay, so this is, I guess, an elaborate way to bend the energy of the mind, and also the pranas as well, and the bindus. It's an elaborate way to do that inner bending, inner type of bending the mind, bending the attitude, the emotional energy, bending it all into wisdom and compassion, essentially. But you would see some practitioners who are maybe doing everything very enthusiastically. You would see some practitioners who are, especially if you go into a big Tibetan monastery where there are lots of monks who are 11 and 13 and 14 and so forth, you would see some who are just chatting or distracted or eating chips, you know, because some types of snacks are offered throughout the ritual. You would see some resting in meditation. So you would see a huge profusion of different types of practitioners. And from our side, we cannot, of course, say who is doing what within their mind. It's perfectly possible to be eating chips and resting in the true nature of the mind. We don't know. But from their side, what's said is that some practitioners would be primarily creating merit and wisdom because they go through all the movements described in the text, because they're reciting prayers and mantras diligently, doing the mudras, you know, doing the visualizations and all of that. And some can do all those outer activities, but their mind is never separated from this true ultimate nature. And that's the primary thing that they're doing. To teach us, they would still be doing mudras, you know, reciting the words and so forth. But deep inside, there is complete stillness from that point of view, as in, like, relatively speaking. They're perfectly established in that ultimate nature. And they're just through that they're accumulating both merit and wisdom and radiating them towards us as well. So very interesting how this is the one point that liberates all. There's that very famous Tibetan expression of knowing one liberates all, or sometimes seeing one liberates all. So this last point of seeing the all-encompassing basis, which in this case is the all-encompassing primordial wisdom, not the all-encompassing consciousness, samsara consciousness. This point incorporates everything, and that's the one we try to arrive at step by step. But to support us in that, the additional instruction here is, between sessions, act like an illusory person. So this is where there is a teaching on two types of illusory body. So the impure illusory body teaching or practice is to simply remind ourselves that this is all like a dream. My persona, this person that I think that I am in the waking state, my body, the movements of my body, and my conventional conditioned thoughts, all the compulsions that arise, these are all like a dream. This is also sometimes called daytime dream yoga as opposed to nighttime dream yoga, which is about gaining lucidity within the dream and then controlling the dream, transforming it, yada, yada, yada. So daytime dream yoga is to remind ourselves that this is all like a dream. Plus, if we truly want to establish also lucidity within the dreams, to sometimes check whether this is an actual dream. And so you have exercises like try pulling on your index finger to see whether it extends. If it does, you're in a dream. So Inception, you know, the movie. If not, that means you're in the quote-unquote waking state, which is still like a dream. So good to do that anyway. And then there are many other things like that of testing to see which dream are we in, the so-called waking dream or the regular dream, which is called also the dream of double delusion. We're just deluded through being in samsara, but in the dream we're also deluded because we're asleep and we're seeing this thing and we're believing it, so double delusion. Yeah, so that's one way of doing it, reminding ourselves that this is all like a dream, not in meditation, but just when we're walking around, you know, so picking up our cup of coffee, taking a sip and saying, oh, all of this, including the taste, the smell, the person grabbing the coffee, the person making the decision to pour the coffee in their mouth, all of our emotions about all of it, interpretations, attitudes, and even our positive interpretations. For example, the wish to satiate our thirst so that we may become a Buddha to bring all benefit to all sentient beings. All of this is like a dream. So that's the, speaking very briefly, the impure illusory body practice. And the pure illusory body practice, which can also be done here, but primarily if we have received a full empowerment into one of the deity yoga systems within Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The pure illusory body would be to train in seeing everything in its pure form, or to relax into seeing everything in its pure form. There are two approaches to that, we could say. So let's, for example, say you have received from a truly qualified master. Some of my friends are in Kathmandu, so the head of the Sakya tradition, His Holiness Sakya Trichin, is there right now. He's been giving a lot of empowerments there. Or just 2 or 3 days ago, His Holiness the Dalai Lama gave an empowerment in Dharamsala for the four-armed Chinrezi practice from the teachings of Terdak Lingpa, and it was also broadcast, and he also allows people to take that online as well. So let's say you took one of those empowerments from a truly qualified master, and you have been empowered, therefore, to meditate on the body, speech, and mind of, let's say, Tara, green Tara, let's say. So then the pure illusory body practice here would be to see your own body as the body of Tara, but also see everyone's body as a body of Tara. See your speech and everyone's speech as the recitation of Tara's mantra, Om Tare Tutare Ture Swaha, and see every aspect of the mind with all of its buzzing energy as Tara's wisdom, the different displays, the play of Tara's primordial wisdom, her inseparable wisdom and compassion. So to do that and not become deluded, as in like, no, you don't get it, I'm Tara, you know, which is not the correct way to do it. Let's say we're breaking, I don't know, rules of riding, of driving, and someone stops us and says, excuse me, you're on the wrong side of the road. This is the UK, you're supposed to drive on the left side. You're like, no, you don't get it, I'm Tara. You know, so it's like, that's not the correct way of doing it. So to practice this pure type of illusory body, we would need a lot of understanding of ultimate and conventional truth, ultimate and conventional nature, and how to apply each one correctly in each individual situation. Because, once again, we don't want to reify this idea that we're Tara, we want to genuinely understand it. But if we have been introduced to such practices, that's one beautiful way to do stuff, and it will very fast help us to accumulate powerful merit, and also strengthen our wisdom accumulation as well, because in order to see ourselves as Tara, we need to see all of this conventional reality that does not look like Tara's Pure Land for its emptiness. We need to see it as empty and see how it can be Tara's Pure Realm, although it doesn't look like it. So actually, first in the Sutric teachings and then in the teachings of great Nyingma masters such as Rangzompa, you have a statement that says that we are all living in the pure land of Buddha Shakyamuni. So this dimension of reality in which we are, this is the pure land of our historical Buddha. And he's still there, you know, radiating light and love over all of us. But because of our obscurations, we don't perceive it as that. So then, and that's not very often emphasized, because sometimes if you just say it to a group of random people who have no understanding of Buddhism whatsoever, then, well, how is it helpful, you know, to hear that? Okay, so then what? But if you say to practitioners, and then as practitioners we start flexing our mind with that, it can become very powerful. How is it possible that we're seeing all this unimaginable suffering and so forth, delusion, you know, war, horrible crimes against humanity and nature and all of that? And how can we at the same time think, even for a moment, that we are in the pure realm of Buddha Shakyamuni? And how to progress, of course, from our current impure perception to the pure perception. But this is where, of course, you also have need of relying on the experience of great practitioners. That's the last thing I'm going to say on this point. Some of you, I don't know if I mentioned this already, one of the greatest UK practitioners, or British practitioners, British by origin, of our time is Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo, who is an exceptional monastic who's done 12 years of retreating in the Himalayan cave. She's very famous. There's a wonderful, incredible book about her, Cave in the Snow. If you haven't read it, definitely recommend. It's a very light read by Vicky Mackenzie, who also lives and teaches in London. Incredible biography. And it's not a Dharma book, and that it's not a Dharma teaching book in which you would be, you know, showered with instructions and all this philosophy that we've been discussing. It's about her life. She was born there, she grew up there, and then she decided to go to India, and she was on a ship, and that ship arrived to India, and then she worked with Fred Abedi teaching some young lamas English, and then she became a nun, and then she did her 12 years of retreat in the cave, and then she traveled to Italy, you know, blah, blah, blah. So kind of like a biography, but incredible because it's a biography of a Dharma practitioner. So one time she was visiting an exceptional, incredible monastery, actually nunnery in eastern Tibet. It's in Kham. The monastery, the nunnery is called Gepcha Gompa. It's an incredible center for training yoginis. Actually, probably one of the biggest centers in the world specifically for preparing professional contemplatives. Because you have some monasteries which train small groups of elite yogis and yoginis in different places, but this nunnery is entirely about preparing yoginis. So it's not divided into the philosopher part and the yogini part. Just everyone is a yogini there. So incredible level of rigor in terms of how these nuns are prepared. And so Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo was visiting that at one point, and there was an incredible old nun called Cherab Zangmo, who was an unimaginable practitioner who started her practice before the occupation of Tibet, before the Cultural Revolution. And she started her practice by doing a dark retreat in which you are sealed in complete darkness, sometimes for 49 days, sometimes for less, sometimes for more, and you are doing special meditations there to very directly face the ultimate nature of your mind and to release some of the knots that block that. Most people just do that as a kind of preliminary exercise, as this, let's see what happens. Not much happens, or just you attain a greater level of inner stability because it's kind of sensory deprivation. Okay, that's still a test, still training. But for Cherab Zangmo, what happened was that she, through being in such a retreat and experiencing some things in it, she arrived at a perfect realization of this line, rest in the all-encompassing basis. She just grasped, understood the nature of the mind, and was never deviating from it again. So she kind of got that even before the Cultural Revolution, and that of course carried through all the turbulent decades with incredible grace and ease, even though she had to suffer a lot on the outer level. And then eventually she returned to the nunnery when it was reestablished or restored, and she was just living there and teaching younger nuns, younger monastics. But everyone knows she was the highest realized woman in that specific part of Tibet. That was her reputation. So one time Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo was visiting her, and Cherab Zangmo was close to death by that point. And there was some exchange between a younger nun and Cherab Zangmo, and Cherab Zangmo very, very casually said, "No, what are you talking about? We're in a Pure Land right now." So the nun spilled something or some kind of minor inconvenience there, and the nun was like, "Oh no, I spilled something like that." And Sherab Zamgon said, "What are you talking about? We are right now in this pure dimension." And it was the way she worded it actually, and the way that Jitsunma Tenzin Palmo tells this story with complete confidence. You could see it was not an intellectual idea. So when I'm saying, "Oh, some masters say we're in the pure land of Buddha Shakyamuni," I have no experience of that. I'm just, making noise here, which is absolutely embarrassing. But for Sherab Zamgon, that was actual lived experience. And not simply lived experience as just like she sat there and thought, "Oh, we are in Pure Land for a long time." That would lead to a certain degree of confidence, but that would still be artificial, not that. Perfect confidence. Why? Because through her nature, her mind not deviating from the nature of her mind, through her being perfectly established in that, she didn't need to do the artificial yoga of pure illusory body, where she would think, "Oh, this is like Tara's realm." She was there in actuality. And there are many practitioners who live like that. Well, many as in more than one, more than 10, more than 20. But not many by comparison with the overall population of the earth. Yeah? Beautiful story, so I'll repeat it for Zoom. So Chogyal Namkha Norbu used to say that many people in this world say Namo Amitofo, maybe I'm reborn in the Pure Land of Great Bliss. And in that Pure Land, people sitting in lotuses are praying to be reborn in the Pure Land of Buddha Shakyamuni, which is, I'll add from my point, true because it's said that in this specific Pure Realm where we are right now, we can progress on the path extremely fast. Devachan is more stress-free because there's not much misery there. So it's kind of a peaceful abode, and certainly there's virtue in being reborn there. That should be our minimal goal. If we don't get realization of this life, at least to get to a good Pure Land like that one. But it's said that while we're here, we better make the most of this time by practicing very intensely, because here we have many unique unique circumstances that support us in our practice, including the fact that there's a lot of suffering around, so we can look at it and cultivate incredible levels of compassion, and including the fact that our energetic system right now allows us to practice advanced types of energy bending, which are not particularly possible in Devachan or not emphasized in that realm. So that's why while we're here, we can do lots of stuff with all of it. So that kind of concludes the training in deepest bodhicitta part. Of course, there's so much more that could be said, explored over the next 40 to 60 years of our lives. So let's explore that together over time. There's wonderful commentaries that I linked on the resource page for this course. So please continue reading those parts and those incredible books. But we'll progress on. We'll move on to the conventional bodhicitta. And before we start unpacking the aphorisms themselves, the first thing to say there is that ideally we would train in both types of bodhicitta kind of every day, because there is danger in overemphasizing deepest bodhicitta and becoming a dry philosopher, or even if we're following this more immediate approach of meditating on the nature of reality, discovering the nature of reality through meditative inquiry alone, still there is danger of becoming too dry about it. And it is not uncommon, especially, well, it is not uncommon anywhere, honestly. It's not specifically a Western problem. But I encountered this a lot in the Western world. It is not uncommon to see people who are super passionate about these deeper types of philosophy, the middle way, and meditation on the nature of the mind and things like that. But those just becomes intellectual games. And part of it is that people are not particularly radiating with love and compassion. They're not particularly kind. There's not particularly visible, you cannot feel that warmth about them that needs to radiate from a true practitioner, and that does radiate from true practitioners that I've been fortunate to meet. And I'm sure that's not just my experience. Whereas sometimes as beginners, we kind of overemphasize the true nature thing, and then we're kind of like doing this intellectual speculation or meditative speculation, but we're not necessarily kind, which is why Tibetan tradition has so many safety nets around that, in that oh, well, before you start getting all these instructions, make sure to do your 100,000 prostrations. You know, that will make you humble. And if you, if that's not enough, do 1,000,000 prostrations or 8,000,000 prostrations. I remember one of the uncles of Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, the one that attained rainbow body, I think he had a vow to do like 80,000,000 prostrations or something like that. So, or 8,000,000, but something completely unimaginable, way beyond what most people do. Well, then it worked, you know, he attained a rainbow body. He dissolved his body in rainbow light. And, well, there's a power in that. But that's a good kind of, once again, Zen-like attitude of, oh, you've been doing all this philosophical speculation, you know, about how things are like a dream. That's nice. How about doing 8,000,000 prostrations now? You know, like get down to business, wash some plates. So there's always that balancing element to how these systems of practice are built. But here the balancing system is to then start cultivating love and compassion, or start cultivating love and compassion kind of parallel. These are two parallel tracks: conventional bodhicitta, deepest bodhicitta. So there's no expectation that we finish deepest bodhicitta by practicing with it for 40 years, and then we start the conventional one. No, we do some sessions on deepest, some sessions on conventional. Some retreats focused more deeply on the deepest, some retreats focused more deeply on conventional. Or retreats in which we do both, 50-50, totally possible as well. So how do we go about conventional bodhicitta? It starts with the aphorism saying, train in both giving and taking and alternation. And this is where we have to stop, as we tend to do, and just give a preliminary overview. In general, to cultivate conventional bodhicitta, we need to have a lot of familiarity with love and compassion, or loving kindness as compassion, as meditation practices. That's my main forte. I don't know much about Buddhism, or I don't know anything, honestly, but Four Immeasurables is the thing that I'm most passionate about, so I've read a lot about it and have sought different masters to receive instructions on this stuff. So this is the thing that I like to teach the most, in that also it is completely secular in a way. You could teach loving kindness practices to people who don't believe in anything. They are Catholic priests and nuns who seek out these instructions. I've talked to Muslims who wanted to learn compassion practices from Buddhism because Allah tells people to be compassionate. Of course, I would want a technique that trains me in that, they said, and so forth. So compassion is completely universal. That's something that His Holiness Dalai Lama always points out, in that if we were to start arguing about Atman or not Atman, emptiness, not emptiness, all of that, we would keep arguing endlessly. Different traditions would insist on their interpretation. But if we were to say, well, do we all think love and compassion are important? Immediately we would reach some agreement. And if someone says, no, they're not important, well, that's an issue. You know, there are some philosophers that think that humans are so deeply corrupted that love and compassion are impossible. But if you have fallen under their influence by Altruism by Mathieu Ricard, by Venerable Mathieu Ricard. It's a fantastic book, published originally in French, then translated to English, available in Spanish, Portuguese, many other languages. And it includes, I think, something like 600 different bits of evidence towards the fact that our underlying nature is altruistic, most of those scientific. So from biology, and he's originally by training a biologist, from Buddhism, from all over the place. But that's if you have been for some reason convinced that no, humans are selfish and no love and compassion are possible. Barring that, we probably know that these are good words, but we would need to train in cultivating those. So we would do lots of loving kindness meditation, lots of compassion meditation, and in addition to those also train in so-called empathetic joy and equanimity. Together, these comprise the so-called Four Immeasurables, and this should be a separate course. So maybe one day, you know, yoga of the Four Immeasurables, training in that, one of the best things to have. If you're a yoga teacher, being able to guide basic loving kindness meditations, incredibly important skill, incredible offering to everyone. So we can talk later about that, and I have so much material online recorded, you know, available and so on, to flesh this point out. Otherwise, I'll end up doing the rest of the sessions just talking about this one point, and we'll never reach the end of the text. So I'm just saying there's so much learning about love and compassion that can be done here before this aphorism about giving and taking can be properly understood. And it's not just me. When the great master Atisha came to Tibet, and he was the one who introduced this teaching. It was just later recorded by Geshe Chekawa, but it was originally from Atisha's realization that it arose, and from his training with Master Serlingpa, as I said in the first session. So when Atisha came to Tibet, he noticed that Tibetans, and that was happening in many domains, they kind of knew some points and were missing some other bits, key bits, and lost the plot, as one of my teachers likes to say. So Atisha restored the plot for them. He explained how everything connects to everything, how it all works together, and so forth. But one important piece that was there was that Tibetans knew that bodhicitta is really cool, and they kind of had admiration for it. This conventional bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. But they kind of forgot that to train in it, you also first need to train in the four immeasurables. You need to do, ideally, dozens and hundreds and thousands of hours of meditation on love, and on compassion, and on empathetic joy, and on equanimity. And Atisha jokingly said, reportedly, that only Tibetans know how to cultivate bodhicitta without training in the four immeasurables first. So to avoid that mistake, which Atisha has already corrected for us, before we receive full benefit from this aphorism and the ensuing ones, it's good to take some time to train in loving kindness and compassion. So just make that mental note. And there will be plenty of additional links in the resource page, and whatever loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, equanimity training you can insert here, it will all contribute to the ultimate goal of gaining bodhicitta. But then what is this giving and taking in alternation? So giving and taking is about combining loving kindness and compassion in one practice that is called, in Tibetan, Tonglen. Very famous name. What happened culturally is that historically Tonglen was initially a secret practice. It was based on some teachings from Shantideva. It was based on some teachings from Serlingpa. Those were brought into Tibet by Atisha, transmitted from Atisha to his primary disciple Dromtunpa, then transmitted through the old Kadampa lineage secretly, and then with Geshe Chekawa, and a little bit earlier with Geshe Langri Tanpa, whose text on the 8 verses we already studied before. Then it kind of slowly started becoming a part of the kind of mass field of global field of information. However, what happened was that Tibetans would still practice it within its original context, of course, of Buddhism, and they would also know that Tonglen is not the first practice you do. There are so many steps before that, special steps of training that you originally need to do. The so-called equalizing and exchanging yourself for others, or exchanging yourself and others. That's an incredible psychological method that Shantideva developed or revealed in his text. In this day and age, if you open something like Insight Timer and you put in Tonglen, you would have like 500 or 5,000 recordings. Many of them by people who have no connection to the Tibetan tradition whatsoever, which I don't mean in terms of cultural gatekeeping, but simply in terms of, yeah, but that's not what it was originally, and therefore it doesn't have the same potency that it originally had. It can still be very beneficial. Even a tiny bit of love and compassion, beautiful. But the full potency of this practice was in all the context around it, the preliminary stages, the specific instructions, and all of that. And there are approaches in the Tibetan tradition, there are specific texts and instructions that explain how Tonglen itself, just that practice alone, can be the full path to full awakening, or the full practice that covers all the bardos, all the intermediate stages, so gives us an opportunity to practice in each specific situation, and so forth. There are incredible teachings which put Tonglen at the very heart of the path as a full system of enlightenment on its own. So it's not at all trivial, and it's not simply, send, give, feel good, not just that. But if all that's where we start, that's also pretty good, send, give, feel nice. That's still powerful. So Tong means to send, Len means to receive, so that is giving and taking, sending and receiving, giving and taking. Sometimes people in English write it as taking and giving. It's just, I guess, because it sounds nicer for some people, but Tonglen is sending and then receiving. And that's actually a very natural sequence, because giving means practicing loving kindness. So loving kindness itself is defined as the wish for a being to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So loving kindness is a specific mental state, one of the forms that we can shape our awareness into. So this is where we return to awareness bending, right? Mind bending. So we can shape our mental energy into different shapes and different forms, and it naturally transforms itself into different shapes due to our previous habituation. So when I encounter a thing that's annoying to me personally, my awareness energy gets configured into anger. When I see something that I like, my awareness energy gets configured into desire or attachment. Ooh, give me. When I see someone succeeding in something that I wanted to succeed at, my awareness energy gets configured into jealousy or envy. When I have reasons to believe I'm superior, it gets configured into so-called pride, which means more arrogance or conceit. It's not the positive kind of pride that is also possible. And finally, most of the time, it also has this underlying shape of ignorance, because I think you exist separately, I exist separately, the floor exists separately, this is all real. If I pursue these things, they will bring me happiness. If I chase away those things, I will avoid suffering, blah, blah, blah. The entire dream. So these are the 5 primary delusions or afflictions that they're called. And there are many other classifications. Sometimes we talk about 3 poisons. Sometimes we talk about many derivative poisons. And eventually we say there are 84,000 of these delusive or deluding shapes of awareness. And then there are positive shapes of awareness that we can use. So if we train in mind bending, we will need at least some of the key ones. Loving kindness is absolutely indispensable, as is compassion. And then the other indispensable ones are concentration and wisdom. So we at least need this kind of very basic set of a few types of kindness, a few types of wisdom, concentration, and on top of that, for Tibetan tradition, we also need things like faith and devotion, which we have talked about last time, and some others. They are all described as positive and virtuous mental states. Positive or virtuous because they bring happiness when we experience them, and they create causes for future happiness. So loving kindness is one of those. It feels good, and it creates causes for future happiness. So good all around. It also has incredible effect on our health, on our DNA, on our telomeres. There's more and more research and all those sorts of things. Completely valid medical research from the United States, not done by hippie people like me. It's not like I researched it, I practiced and my telomeres became longer, so you should practice. No. It's all like laboratory done, peer review magazines and all those sorts of things. So good all around. So configuring our mind into this wish, may you be happy and have the causes of happiness, or may we be happy and have the causes of happiness, or even may I be happy and have the causes of happiness. Eventually, may all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness, is what training in loving kindness is. So we configure it into that shape and then we hold it. It kind of starts falling apart a little bit because we're getting distracted or the intensity of it is diminishing, but we breathe more life into it. We strengthen the concentration, we hold it with greater passion. And through that, we eventually can traverse the entire path to perfect concentration. That's why the Buddha taught this also as a concentration technique. And it has been used as a concentration technique by many great masters of the past, especially in the Pali tradition. Some of the earliest monastics of the Buddha used this to cultivate their concentration ability. And it's still used in the same way. But we can also, not even paying attention to concentration, just do it for the sake of loving kindness. And then compassion, which here corresponds to taking, is the wish for beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So compassion is a mental state, a type of awareness that recognizes suffering and also potential for future suffering. You might not be sad right now, but you will be one day, inevitably living in samsara, and we all will get sick and old and die. And if we don't get sick, we'll just die before that. It's like, these are not good news. And we have established them already when we were doing the 4 mental revolutions. But seeing all of that, compassion says, may you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And eventually, at its later stage, it also says, and I will do everything I can for you not to suffer and not to have the causes of suffering. But initially, just wishes, may you not suffer. Whereas loving kindness wishes, may you be happy. So they're complementary. They're looking at the same being from 2 different points of view. Compassion looks at a being, sees that it is suffering, and says, hey, don't suffer. May you not suffer. Loving kindness looks at a being and sees, wow, you have the potential to be truly happy. because you have Buddha nature from a Buddhist point of view. Not simply because you have career opportunities, and you can always move to a better apartment. Not that those things are important as well, but on a deeper level, wow, you have this incredible potential that is not yet fully realized. You have Buddha nature. So may you be happy. May you progress towards this full flourishing. So initially we train in them separately, actually. We can invest hundreds of hours into loving kindness, hundreds of hours into compassion, and then we can combine them here by giving and taking in alternation. So with giving, we send that wish, may you be happy and have the causes of happiness. But on top of simply sending the wish, which absolutely needs to be there. If the wish is not there, everything else just becomes mental Disneyland, as Khandro Rinpoche calls it. Because doing the visualizations but not having the wish of loving kindness is just doing visualizations for the fun of it. So it's empty practice without the essential point. The essential point is to have that wish, which is why we need to train in loving kindness first. But then with that, we add the visualizations in which we imagine that we take everything good that we have, and not simply our money and our reputation and things like that, but on a deeper level, also our positive network of positive potential, and we give it out to all sentient beings. So technically, we cannot really give out our positive potential to sentient beings. We cannot, extract some of my good karma and transfer it to others. With realized masters, it's a bit more tricky because they are not following the same rules as the rest of us. And their ability to affect everyone's karma is much more profound than ours. But on our current level, it is impossible for me to actually transfer my good karma to you. However, by generating that altruistic wish and truly feeling as if I could, I would, we break through so many levels of selfishness and self-centeredness. And we arrive at such a powerful degree of altruism, at such a powerful sense of connection with everyone, which is a precursor to enlightenment. So that's what we imagine. We imagine that all the happiness that I have right now currently experienced by me, all the blessings that I have, good bed and some vitamins, I don't know what else do I have, some money in the bank, but not much, all those sorts of things, like some fancy clothes that I bought in Nepal, and nice thermos. I do have 3 nice thermoses, thank you very much. Four nice thermoses. All of that I give to all sentient beings. But beyond that, all the good karma that could bring me more thermoses. And all the good qualities in my mind, take them. If I have some loving kindness, take it. Oh, for goodness sake, you need it. Things like that. Projecting it all, sending it, and with visualizations. So they can be very elaborate or very simple. In the simpler ones, we imagine simply white light sent out to all beings. And the more elaborate ones, we imagine symbols of it all. And there are sometimes sequences in which we would imagine going step by step. For example, first we would give, in one such sequence, we would first give everyone outer environments for their practice and perfect bodies to be practicing. Because if someone is currently a spider or a hungry ghost or, I don't know, a cow that's about to be killed, those are not optimal conditions for spiritual practice. So may they, through my merit, gain perfect human bodies or divine bodies in which they will be able to meditate, practice, become Buddhas. So take my karmic money, buy yourself a nice body, and start practicing right now. I'm giving it to all to you. So starting with the environment, then the secondary conditions of having nice food, access to teachers, and so forth. Then going towards the inside of their being. Oh, and may you have karma that would stimulate your positive qualities, help you arrive at the recognition of your true nature. So moving from the outside in. It's not the only approach, but one of them. And meditating on each of these stages for some time. And then eventually seeing them in our imagination arrive at full awakening. So that is giving if we're doing giving on its own. As the basis of that, we would also need to have some view of emptiness, seeing that it's all interdependently existent. It's not independently existent. It all unfolds in this domain of our pristine awareness. So there needs to be some level of wisdom present, at least as a thought, oh, it's all interdependent, it's all empty, something like that, at least that basic level. And the more we have that approximation of primordial wisdom, the more we integrate it into this practice as well. Otherwise, the practice will just be a play of imagination, and when it's not supported by wisdom, it's not as effective. But even thinking, oh, yes, it is all empty, therefore it's all possible, that is already something. And then for taking, we do the same thing with compassion. So first we need the essence, compassion. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And then we do the taking. So what does the taking imply? If I could take the suffering of all sentient beings and the causes of suffering of all sentient beings upon myself, I would do it. So right now I'm training in it in meditation. So I imagine that I'm extracting the causes of suffering from all beings, and I'm taking it upon myself. Then what do we do with that? That's where different traditions offer completely different strategies. And the sequence that we've been following so far, and we've been talking a lot about pristine awareness and things like that, it makes sense to do a rather elegant practice in which we imagine that a symbol of pristine awareness is in our heart, for example, an orb of light, or crossed vajras, and there are different ways of visualizing this stuff. So let's say an orb of light, a very simple thing, a symbol of our Buddha nature, of our pristine awareness. So we absorb all this suffering, it passes through our system indeed, passes through our conventional body, speech, and mind, but then it arrives at that pristine awareness that dissolves there without a trace, gets transformed into boundless, luminous joy. And in other traditions, you would have more forceful visualizations in which you would be using this suffering to attack your self-cherishing and self-grasping and so on. But best to start with this more gentle approach, because some Westerners overdo it with this, yes, attack self-grasping, then they actually start experiencing unpleasant sensations in their heart, and just the whole system goes out of balance because we do not yet have the necessary level of chill. You know, we're not chill enough to succeed in such practices. Better start with this. Yes, there is basic goodness, so may it all dissolve in that. Then we can do these more elaborate, stronger visualizations as well. So it all dissolves there. And just like with taking, just like with giving, first of all, compassion needs to be present at every stage of that process. We're doing it specifically to liberate beings from suffering and the causes of suffering. But when we're doing that, we can also do it in stages. So once again, there can be sequences taught in which we first take the environmental problems, like everything that is around you, then body-related problems, then circumstance-related problems, then inner problems. I'm taking upon myself the bad habits of beings, and their anger, and their attachment, and their delusion, their pride, their jealousy, and so forth. And then even the most subtle obscurations that prevent even the greatest bodhisattvas from fully reaching enlightenment. May those fall upon me right now as well. And then eventually it's all taken and dissolved, and we imagine that they've all reached perfect freedom from suffering, which equals perfect happiness. No suffering is happiness. Happiness is absence of suffering. So these exist like that. So very, very powerful thing, and we do that for a long time. And then we, at the end, have to arrive at bodhicitta itself. And this is the thing that is often skipped when Tonglen practices are just done for a good feeling or just to do some love and compassion. This is specifically training in conventional bodhicitta, right? So at the end of this meditation, we need to then generate bodhicitta proper. So we need to think, once we have done all the giving and all the taking, the only way I'd be able to truly liberate them from suffering and truly bring them to happiness is to become a Buddha. So may I become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then we rest in that, and we strengthen that resolve, and we strengthen and strengthen and strengthen it until it becomes super powerful, and we habituate ourselves to that habit more and more and more and more, and eventually it becomes completely spontaneous and natural. And when it becomes fully spontaneous, then that's when we have become an actual bodhisattva. Not simply an aspiring bodhisattva, or a pledged bodhisattva, someone who has taken bodhisattva vows but doesn't yet have spontaneous bodhicitta, but an actual bodhisattva proper, when bodhicitta becomes spontaneous, this one. So that's the end point that's often missing. So for these practices, when they're taught in their traditional context, the visualizations are sometimes really extreme. Not so much for the giving, because yes, you can imagine, I don't know, pots of gold and rainbows and credit cards and whatever is associated with different types of hedonic and eudaimonic joy, outer and inner well-being. But for taking, if you're taking sickness, you imagine cancerous growths and cells, and you imagine rockets killing all of the bad stuff, not simply, dark particles and something like that. In the more elaborate kind of radical practice, you imagine truly, everything bad that you can think of in its most radical form. Not to practice like visualizing gore, not that, not, a horror movie produced by Hollywood, not that, but actual things that people face. So for a cancer patient, their type of suffering comes first and foremost from that cancerous growth, from those cancerous cells. For a child in Ukraine right now, a rocket that can fall from the sky at any moment, taking that. But beyond that, of course, also the causes of suffering. For the mind of the person sending that rocket, what unimaginable delusion, hubris, all those sorts of things, taking them. May they fall upon me. May they leave their mind, so their mind becomes more clear. So very, very powerful. And it's said with absolute certainty that although we cannot guarantee it in any way, sometimes this practice, just like practices of loving kindness and compassion, can indeed make a difference for people. I've certainly experienced that myself when sometimes I get sick or something difficult happens, or I face some obstacles, and then I ask my Dharma friends to do practice to support me in some way, and they do practices related to medicine Buddha or something like that, or this practice of giving and taking, or simply loving kindness and compassion. Sometimes there's an obvious shift in the situation that cannot be explained in any other way. As it's explained, depends on the strength of our karmic connection with the individual. So if we're removed 70 times from someone, the practice is not going to be particularly strong, even though it still might have an effect. But a mother and a child, it's said, have the strongest karmic connection. Out of all the types of karmic connection in the world, the strongest one in a particular life is the one between a child and a parent. And between the two parents, specifically between the mother and the child, because the child used to live inside the mother. So for example, if a mother does such a practice for a sick child, or vice versa, if a child does such a practice for the mother who's recently passed away to affect the next rebirth, these are said to be very powerful things. But beyond that, there's of course also the strength of concentration, the strength of realization, and many other things that affect the results. So if a group of people is doing such a practice, it would have stronger effect. If a powerful Lama is doing such a practice, of course it would have a much stronger effect. So there are many variables there. But it is important to say and to mention that the primary emphasis in this practice is on transforming our own mind, not on affecting the outer situation, even though that might happen. And for that, the funny anecdote there is that it is not uncommon for people to start learning loving kindness practice. And in loving kindness practice, at one point, you have to focus on your so-called enemies, so people you dislike. And to say, hey, may you be happy as well, this annoying person, that I don't want to have coffee with. And then people sometimes ask, well, what if he does become happy? I don't want that. I don't want him to be happy. What do you mean? What if my practice gives him happiness? And then you have to answer like, well, that's the point, But it's not simply as yes, one point is for your mind to be transformed, but another point is that happiness that you're wishing for this person is not simply the hedonic happiness of outer stimulation. You're not wishing for this annoying person to have more good wine and more fancy cars. You're wishing for them to have a more clear and wise mind as well. And wouldn't that be lovely? Because if you think they're annoying, or you think they're evil, they're probably evil in your perception because you think they are unethical, not clear-minded, do not understand interdependence, not kind, not compassionate, not caring, yada, yada, yada. So if they had all those qualities, they wouldn't be annoying anymore. So may they have them, please. If your practice can contribute to that, fantastic. So we kind of do that with all beings, and that's the first aphorism, train in both giving and taking in alternation. So we can do, once we have trained in loving kindness and compassion a lot in separate sessions, we can do sessions in which we do giving for a few minutes, taking for a few minutes, giving for a few minutes, taking for a few minutes. And the next aphorism, which we're going to discuss next time, is about mounting those two on the breath, how to combine that with the process of breathing, which kind of plays very nicely with the ultimate bodhicitta practice that we did today. Once again, using our breath, the inhalation and the exhalation, but here to combine them with loving kindness and compassion instead of release and focus. But before that, before we conclude, let's just do a tiny loving kindness meditation for 5 minutes, if that's okay. I think that's a nice note to conclude on. So, doing a tiny bit of stretching if necessary, and then arriving at a comfortable stationary position. And actually, even positioning our body comfortably is an act of loving kindness for ourselves. We think, I want this person to be happy, have the causes of happiness, so I'll establish this body in a stable, comfortable configuration. allowing the breath to move naturally. Briefly revisiting our highest aspirations, for example, thinking, I am doing this to become fully awakened eventually, and for that I will now train in loving kindness. Of course, for the benefit of all beings. And then, for a little while, bringing our attention to ourselves as a person sitting here, or maybe lying down if we're listening to this in the horizontal position, and attending to this person as if we were an unbiased friend, or even a realized yogini looking at this bubble of a being and seeing the beauty of the Buddha nature, the painful habits, all of this, with care and tenderness. Satyayogini, someone like Sherab Zangmo, would see both our incredible potential and our trajectory towards that. And she would not be judging us for the small stuff. That's not what's important. She would simply hold us in tender, affectionate awareness, as if holding a kitten or a newborn baby. And then out of this foundational tenderness, called tsewa in Tibetan, she would generate the wish of loving kindness proper. May you be happy. And here we can either think, may I be happy and have the causes of happiness, or as if looking at ourselves from the outside, may you be happy and have the causes of happiness. As long as the wish is directed towards the same person, doesn't matter. We just need to have the wish and to hold it, sending it into the depths of our being. May I be happy and have the causes of happiness. Then extending our awareness to other practitioners who are here with us in person or online or across the 3 times in terms of listening to this recording, all the different people connected to this course in one way or another. And seeing how, once again, Satyayogini would hold all of these bubbles of beings with the same tenderness, with the same equal respect, open-heartedness. And so can we. Perceiving all of us together as a group of vulnerable beings with amazing potential. Temporarily dropping the judgments. And arriving at the wish, may we be happy and have the causes of happiness. If we wish strengthening this with each exhalation, to not lose the thread of loving kindness. And then opening it up boundlessly. If all beings were equally like kittens placed into our hands for protection and care, if we could see everyone's true nature and true potential under all the layers of deluding beliefs, views, mental states, and so forth, we could easily wish, may all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. So, wishing for that and breathing life into that wish once again. And then allowing ourselves to use this all-pervading loving kindness directed towards all, as the dedication for today's class as well. We can think of all the positive imprints we have created through practicing wisdom, through practicing kindness, and dedicate all of that to our full awakening for the benefit of all beings, and towards everyone's full awakening, along with such goals as the long life of all the true bodhisattvas present in this world. May they continue guiding all beings, all types of suffering immediately being removed, the wars, global diseases, all the signs of the degenerate age. May everything become indeed the pure land of Buddha Shakyamuni that feels like a pure land for all who live. And then returning to our body, grounding ourselves there, and slowly introducing some movement to conclude the meditation. Thank you. And two practice suggestions. One is to experiment a little bit with the wisdom side. So I'll add to the resource page some links to specifically this Padmasambhava method as guided meditations. Or we can also experiment with the line about acting like an illusory person, the so-called daytime dream yoga. Oh, it is all like a dream. Wow. Interesting. But another thing, then I would definitely recommend that, and it's in a way simpler, is to do some loving kindness practices between now and then. There's so many good recordings, and I would not call mine good, but there are there as well. So any sort of practice in which we simply rest in this wishing for beings to be happy would really make Tonglen practice easier for us, and we're going to train in that one next time and talk about it more. So yeah, please experiment with it a little bit, and let's hope it helps. Yeah. Wishing you a beautiful weekend and a beautiful week. Thank you.